Hey guys, Varanice here. Drodo recently teased the return of Shadow Devil, and I think that's something we're all pretty excited to see. So I figured we could go over the experimental patch notes today, and I'll share my thoughts with you guys on the upcoming changes. Let me know in the comments what builds you're excited to try with Shadow Devil once he comes out. Let's get into it. As I mentioned, our first change is going to be Shadow Devil re-releasing. Shadow Devil was a 3-cost Demon Warlock piece that was pretty strong as an early game unit. They've changed his ult slightly. So his ult, after a 1.5 second delay, releases a bunch of shockwaves and does magic damage based on the star rarity of the piece. And for each demon synergy that activates, you get an additional shockwave. And then you reduce the cooldown by 3 seconds and 2 seconds at 2-star and 3-star. I think this will probably again be a very strong early game piece. Doing a little bit of theory crafting. I think if he's able to slot into any late game builds, my prediction right now is probably his best shot as a carry unit, probably in Divinity Warlock. Divinity Warlock should be able to lower his cooldown to like 4 seconds or so. And then the Warlocks will help give him spell lifesteal to sustain his health. Chaining cast. I also think he has some potential in 9 Mage. 9 Mage will massively buff the amount of magic damage that his ult does, and then he'll just kind of serve as a kind of a standalone unit. Probably wouldn't need that many items in that build. I think he has some potential there. Demon bonus cancels out, and you don't usually play a Warlock in that build, so I don't think you'll run into any conflicts there. The last build that I kind of had in mind was in Cave Demons. Cave Demons, really high rolling and you're very high health. There's not much of a point in playing 6 Cave. You could play like 4 Cave, and then with like 6 or 7 demons, you get a Rogue Guard. Your Rogue Guard gets another demon buff, and your Shadow Devil is just going to have an absolutely absurd amount of shockwaves. Like you might be getting 14 or 15 shockwaves or something crazy like that. So that seems like that could be pretty good. Next we've got Venom. Venom is changing from a 3-cost unit to a 2-cost unit, and he is losing 100, 200, 400 health at each star rarity. I think this will mostly benefit 9 Mage. 9 Mage is the only build that I really see Venom played in consistently right now. This might mean that we'll see more early 3 dragon play in the early game, with being able to hit like Umbra, Wyvern, and then Venom. Could make that a little bit more viable. But in general, I think this will help the piece a lot. They're not changing the ultimate, unlike when they changed Flame Wizard. So I think that this probably is just a straight up buff. The health change is pretty minor. Not changing the ultimate at all is pretty significant. So this really just makes it way more accessible to potentially 3-star your Venom. So maybe we'll try and play some 3-star Venom 9 Mage games and see how that feels. Next we've got Dwarf. Dwarf 1 is being removed from the game, which we'll see in a second here why. Dwarf 2 is being changed to increase all ranged allies' attack range by 2 and deal extra damage equal to the number of grids between the sides times 5%. So basically, if you're 6 tiles away from the unit you're attacking, you'll get a 30% damage buff, if I'm understanding this correctly. And then it still gives priority to the lowest health target. Removing Dwarf 1 has some interesting implications. Most notably, this means that 4 wizard builds can now play things like Helicopter, so Helicopter can now be played in 9 Mage. Outside of that, I don't know that the removal of Dwarf 1 is that huge. It means that if you play a Sniper with Hunters early on, you won't have Dwarf. Won't need to necessarily position so particularly for Assassins in the early game. Your Sniper will now be able to help deal with those. Our next change is Burst Rifle. Burst Rifle was previously Black Ice Lance. This was the item that was built with a sword and the staff that had the shove effect. It is having the shove effect removed, and because the recipe is changing from sword staff to sword coin, it's gaining the evasion from the coin instead of from the staff. I think this makes sense. It's not really generally used as a magic item. Usually more used on like ranged attack carries, so I think this makes sense. More in line with how it's actually used. It's also gaining Dwarf synergy. They're introducing more items like Cure Glove that give additional unit synergies from crafting items, which is kind of interesting. It attacks one additional unit, dealing 15%. So it gains part of the upgraded splitter effect that was previously on the legendary item. I think this is going to be really good. This might be the best item to build on ranged attack units now. It's kind of like their equivalent to Cleave. I think this will be a really, really good item. Maybe even build multiple of these. The only downside is that this doesn't really give you any attack speed, but attack speed's pretty hard to get now in general, so we'll see how much that actually matters. Next we've got Split Arrow. Split Arrow was previously Holy Spirit Lance. I've always kind of called this Splitter, so this probably just helps make that a little bit more clear. It is made with the previous item and the axe, so the recipe hasn't changed at all. I don't believe the base stats have changed, except again, they switched out the spell damage for the evasion because it's now being made with a coin. It still gains the Dwarf synergy, but it gets this splitter effect where it can attack 2 additional enemies for 30% base damage. This item's still going to be really good. This is arguably a slight buff, again, because the evasion is just more applicable than the spell damage was. So that's still going to be one of the best items in the game, probably. Next, we've got Ice Plate. Ice Plate is no longer going to be made with coin, but will be instead made with Magic Wand. And it has received some ability damage in exchange for the evasion. Other than that, the item is unchanged. I'll go ahead and talk about Icearmor here as well. Icearmor is basically the same thing. It just had the ability damage exchange for the evasion from the coin. I think in general, this is a change that makes a lot of sense. This is often used as an item to do a lot of burst damage at the start of the round to get a quick spell off. So I think this is more in line with what the item is actually used for instead of what it was doing before. I still think this is one of the best items in the game though, so I was kind of hoping that they would maybe nerf this item slightly, but this looks like it will probably also help 9 Mage quite a lot because it's probably the build that benefits the most from building Icearmor on round 30. Some units may be worth mentioning. I don't think this item will scale the defensive attributes of Warpwood nearly as insanely as it did previously, but I think units like God of War and Thunder Spirit will benefit from this quite a lot. They're kind of designed to be put on them. God of War in particular really wants armor and ability damage early on. Thunder Spirit, you often really want to frontline it, so this will help with the sustainability, give it some ability damage, ability lifesteal. Like this just looks great on Thunder Spirit. So yep, again, these are changes that are being pushed out on the experimental server, so I'm not really expecting these changes to go live on the current server for probably at least another week or two after this video goes up. If you enjoyed the video or some of my other content, consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me out a lot. So thanks for watching. I'll see you later.